A man is pushing his own vehicle down a road in Delhi. It's not broken. Nothing has fallen off it. 30 seconds earlier, it was moving normally, carrying him and his passengers through traffic. Then it simply stopped. No warning, no strange sound. He steps out, checks the wiring, checks the battery, finds nothing wrong. So he starts pushing. He pushes it for almost 3 kilometers. Somewhere nearby, a stranger had just closed a phone app after tapping one button. This has happened to hundreds of e-rickshaw drivers across India in the last few weeks. One driver filmed mid-route, breaks down and says he has just lost an entire day's income. Another driver says on camera that he paid a stranger 100 to 200 rupees just to get his own vehicle switched back on. Sit with that for a moment. A man paid a stranger money so that his own property would start working again. The tool behind this is a free phone app called BAT-BMS, along with two others, Lossigi and Epoch Li-Ion. None of them were built to hurt anyone. They were built to check the health of a lithium battery, charge level, voltage, temperature, how many charging cycles it has left. A perfectly normal maintenance tool used by mechanics and battery technicians. The problem is that many of the cheap battery packs fitted into low cost e rickshaws use a Bluetooth chip with no password on it at all. Anyone standing within roughly 10 to 15 meters can open the app, connect to that battery, and flip what is called the discharge switch. That switch cuts power to the motor. The vehicle stops immediately, whether it is carrying two passengers or crossing an intersection. It makes no difference to the switch. Not every e rickshaw is at risk. A large share of them still run on old fashioned lead acid batteries, which have no Bluetooth at all and are completely unaffected. But among the newer lithium models, especially the cheapest ones sold by small, unbranded manufacturers, this open connection is common. The Indian government has now ordered these apps removed from the app stores. Police in Ujjain, in Madhya Pradesh, arrested a man accused of doing this to strangers for money. Delhi's Transport Department has opened a formal inquiry. That is the official version of the story. A security flaw exploited by a handful of bad actors, now being cleaned up. Here is the part that gets left out of that version: that discharge switch was never an accident. It is not a bug somebody forgot to patch. It exists because somebody wanted it there, and it was not the driver. To understand why, you need to understand how most e rickshaw drivers actually get their vehicle in the first place. India has roughly 1.5 million e rickshaws on its roads, carrying an estimated 60 million passengers every single day. More than half of the people driving them do not own the vehicle at all. They rent it by the day from someone else, handing over a share of their earnings before they even started working, simply because financing is so hard to get. For the drivers who do manage to buy one, the vehicle itself typically costs somewhere between 60,000 and 130,000 rupees. Almost none of them can pay that in cash, and almost none of them can offer land, gold, or savings as collateral because they don't have any. So they borrow, usually from a bank or a non banking finance company, against the vehicle itself. Here is the number that explains everything else in this story. Default rates on three-wheeler loans in India run as high as 30%. Roughly 3 out of every 10 loans at some point stop being paid on schedule. Microfinance lenders are so nervous about this that many of them cap the first loan at 75,000 rupees, which covers less than half the cost of the vehicle, leaving the driver to find the rest somewhere else, often from an informal money lender charging far higher interest with far less patience. Now put yourself in the position of the person lending that money. If close to a third of your borrowers might eventually stop paying, what does it cost you to enforce the loan the normal way? You file a case, you wait months for a court date, you send an agent out into a city to physically locate a three-wheeler that moves through traffic all day, every day, and somehow bring it back. Even if you succeed, a used e-rickshaw that has been driven hard for a year is not worth much, so the recovery barely covers what you lost. Compare that to a switch. One tap on a phone from anywhere and the vehicle simply stops moving. No court order. No agent driving around a city hunting for a license plate. No waiting. So somewhere in the design of these battery systems, a feature was built for exactly that purpose. Remote control held by whoever has the technical key, not whoever holds the ownership papers. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is simply how lending works when you are giving money to people with no formal credit history and very little to seize if they stop paying. Dealers and finance companies wanted a way to enforce repayment without going to court every time, and a wide open Bluetooth switch does exactly that at almost no cost to build. What nobody seems to have planned for is that the same switch, with no password guarding it, is just as available to a bored teenager standing on a sidewalk as it is to a finance company chasing a missed installment. The viral videos did not create a new vulnerability, They simply pointed a camera at one that was already built in on purpose for somebody else's benefit. This is the part that everyone involved quietly understands and nobody says out loud. The lender wants remote control because legal repossession is slow and expensive, and the vehicle isn't worth much once it's used anyway. The battery assemblers, many of them small, unbranded operations competing purely on price, leave the Bluetooth connection open because adding a password costs a little more money and a little more effort in a market where the entire business is winning on being the cheapest option on the lot. The dealer who hands over the keys rarely bothers to secure the pairing because his responsibility ends the moment the sale is done. And the driver, who has just been told that he finally owns his vehicle instead of renting it, was never actually given full control over it. He was handed a machine that other people, for reasons that have nothing to do with him, can switch off whenever they choose. Now compare that to how this is sold to him in the first place. There are government subsidies, there are schemes with names like PME Drive, all built around a single word: ownership. The pitch to a driver who has spent years renting a vehicle and handing over part of every day's income to somebody else is simple and appealing. Take a loan, buy your own e-rickshaw, and finally be your own boss. That word ownership is doing a lot of work in that sentence because it is tied directly to a man's sense of who he is. An owner driver is not the same thing in his own eyes or his neighbors as a man who rents. It is the difference between working for yourself and working for somebody else. That is exactly why losing control of the vehicle in the middle of a road, in front of watching passengers, in front of a phone camera, cuts as deep as it does. It is not only lost income, it is a public demonstration that the thing he was told was his was never entirely his to begin with. Real ownership means nobody can take away your ability to use your own property without going through some accountable legal process. What many of these drivers actually have is possession that can be switched off from a distance, sometime by a financier enforcing a missed payment, and now it turns out sometime by a total stranger with a free app and an idle afternoon. The paperwork says owner, the hardware quietly says something else. And notice who ends up carrying the blame once all of this becomes public. A man in Ujjain gets arrested, the videos get labeled pranks, commentators talk about a few reckless individuals ruining a good idea for everyone else. That is a comfortable version of events because it ends with a villain who can be arrested and an app that can be pulled from a store. It does not require anyone to ask why more than a million e-rickshaws on Indian roads left the factory with a battery system that any passing stranger can operate with a free download. It does not require a battery assembler to spend the extra money on a password. It does not require a finance company to give up a tool that makes chasing defaulters cheaper than sending an agent across the city. Removing three apps from two app stores changes nothing about the hardware already sitting inside every one of those vehicles right now. Today, on the road, there is an answer here that would actually work, and it is not complicated. If a vehicle can be disabled by a remote command, that command should require the same accountability that a physical repossession already requires under Indian motor vehicle law. A documented order, a verified identity, a record someone can be held to later, not an open Bluetooth connection that anyone standing close enough can use. This is a solvable problem. Add a password. Require the app and the battery to authenticate each other before any command is accepted. It would add a small cost to every unit built. Nobody with the power to demand this as a standard, not the ministry that oversees vehicle manufacturing, not the industry associations, not the app stores that only acted once the videos went viral, has made it a requirement. That is not an accident either. A financier keeps a useful enforcement tool. A manufacturer keeps costs down in a market where every rupee added to the price affects how many units get sold. Nobody wants to be the one who slows down the country's own electric vehicle growth numbers by adding a small amount of friction to a fast growing, cost sensitive market. So go back to that driver on camera handing a stranger 100 or 200 rupees just to get his e-rickshaw switched back on. That is not really a story about a prank. That is a driver paying a small ransom for his own vehicle. And almost nobody watching the video called it that at the time. Now picture the same road 10 years from now. If nothing about this actually changes, the switch will probably still exist. It might not even get called a hack by then. Batteries could be rented as a subscription instead of bought outright, with remote lock listed quietly somewhere in terms and conditions nobody reads before signing. A driver will still be one missed payment or one stranger with a phone and a free afternoon away from losing a day's earnings. The only real difference is that by then it will not make anyone cry on camera and it will not go viral because everyone will already understand that this is simply how the vehicle works. A man will still be walking beside his own rickshaw, pushing it down a road. It just will not be news anymore.